Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session providing information regarding the fiscal updates impacting housing subsidies and self-directed services. A little bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded and will be made available at a later date. Questions should be held to the end of the presentation because we'll be moving through a great deal of information, and we may cover your question before the end of the session. At the end of the session, we will review any questions that are received through the Q&A and respond to questions as time allows after the entire session, after all of the information has been presented. Presenting today, you'll be hearing from Christine Carey, the Director of Fiscal Management, Craig Rogers, the Director of Budget Services, myself, Patricia Downs, I'm the Director of OPWDD Housing Programs, and also Chad Colarusso, the Statewide Coordinator of OPWDD Self-Directed Services. Alexis Harrington, the Associate Commissioner of Program Implementation, is also on today's call and will help answer questions if we have any at the end and as time allows. Today we're going to go through a number of different items. High level, we're going to go over the enhanced funding and increase in housing subsidy payments. We're going to talk about the administrative fee structure changes and what that entails and what the expectations are. And then finally, the increase in personal resource allocation under the self-direction programs. And then at the end, we'll answer questions again as time allows. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleagues from our budget office, Christine and Craig, and they will begin going over the changes to the subsidy.
Thank you, Tricia. Good afternoon, everybody. As most of you are aware, the 2022-23 enacted state budget continues Governor Hochul's affordable and supportive housing plan by making investments in OPWD's housing program and self-direction. As we'll get into during this presentation, these investments allow OPWD to increase their housing payment standards, restructure administration payments for the housing subsidy program, and apply a cost of living adjustment to self-direction budget. Slide, please. Getting into the increase in the housing payment standards first, I'll start by saying that, OPWD's housing subsidy program supports people living independently in the community with appropriate supports. And, with the implementation of the funding changes that are being discussed today, all programmatic expectations outlined in ADM 2022-03 still must be met. Similar to the current calculation, the housing payment standards will vary based on county and number of bedrooms of the residents, as well as the individual's income contribution. The only change to the calculation is going to be that the maximum subsidies are being increased to comport with the 2022 HUD fair market rent or FMR standards, which can be found on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics website. If it's helpful, we have a PDF that can be provided after the presentation with a table of the standards by county and bedroom size. And then I think that's all I had for this point. So I'm going to pass it back to Tricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. OPWDD recognizes that we will have a large number of people who will have a change in their housing subsidy based on the change in the maximums for the county. So as identified in the guidance that we issued a couple of weeks ago, we just want to reaffirm that because of the large number of changes that will probably take place, we are going to prioritize certain budget applications over others in terms of what is reviewed first. So we're going to place priority at the regional office level on people who are new to the housing subsidy program so they can get started. We're going to review budgets of people who are relocating so that they have a change in location and probably a change in lease, and that particular piece of their budget could potentially be being changed, so we're going to look at them as well. And then the other folks who we're going to focus on in terms of prioritizing review of budget are people who are currently paying a rent level over the county max, from the current county max that's in effect today before the new ones come into effect, because they're typically paying money out of pocket towards their rent, so it puts them above the expected 30% of their income towards housing. So those are the folks who are going, OPWDD regional office staff are going to focus on reviewing their budget changes first, and then they'll be working through the other folks who don't have a change, or it's a more nominal change, or whatever that situation is. So these are the folks we're going to focus on. Okay. In order for the regional office to review a change to a person's budget, they're going to require the completion of a new budget using the version that was issued with the guidance and any updated versions that are coming out. You should be receiving an updated version of the budget. We've gone through and made some updates to the budgets themselves, both for self-direction and for the traditional housing subsidy, to make it clearer, what the specific information is that we're asking for, and also, just to make the budget on the non-self-directed side a little bit cleaner, and potentially less confusing, because less information is requested, because a lot of the information in the original version that was shared is tied to self-direction, and a lot of folks who are receiving the traditional subsidy, it may be confusing for their provider, because of the additional information that is requested. But the new budgets will need to be submitted in order for a change to be assessed by the regional office staff. If the information is not complete, the RO will follow up with the provider for the additional information. So you may see some back and forth if all of the requested information is not submitted in the first instance. So when you submit the housing subsidy budget, all of the information is expected to be updated, including a person's income. So we would need to see any kind of supporting documentation for the budgetary numbers that are being included. You shouldn't just resubmit old information. You should go through and make sure that it is accurate. If you have updated, for example, utility costs and things like that, that should be included as well. So again, there's an order of prioritization, but that order is going to be impacted as well by when the information comes in, and it's a full packet of information that can be accurately assessed. Okay. The housing subsidy change in a person's budget can only be implemented back to the date of the memo or the date that the budget change is submitted to the regional office, whichever is later. So just everyone be aware of that. I believe that Chad is going to provide some additional information on the impact of self-direction when he reviews that section towards the end of our presentation today. So, please just, as you're filling out people's budgets, please make them as accurate as possible, provide supporting documentation, and send it in as soon as you're able to, and then the regional office will assess based on the prioritization that we discussed earlier. So at this point, I am going to turn the slides back over to my colleagues from Budget to discuss more about the administrative fee change.
Thank you. So on the administrative fee change, as part of the budget, OPWD is going to try to align the responsibilities identified in the housing ADM along with the administrative reimbursement. So So, more specifically, we're changing from a percentage-based payment to a flat payment that will vary by region. Previously, admin had been calculated as a percentage of the housing subsidy paid to each person. And so, we're changing that so that the payment will be made per person per month on a flat fee that varies by region. As part of the restructure, fiscal intermediaries will also be able to access the payment when supporting a person with an active housing subsidy paid through their self-direction plan. Slide, please. So again, the new administrative reimbursement will be paid monthly for any individual receiving a housing subsidy, self-direction or otherwise. And, downstate, which we're calling the 5 boroughs of New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, Sullivan, and Orange, will be eligible for the downstate fee of $175 per month. And the remaining counties will be eligible for the upstate fee of $125 per person per month. And I think that's all we had on the fees. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. We're just going to take a few minutes to go back over what types of activities are required to be documented for a provider to retain their administrative fee under audit. These were identified in the ADM 2022-03, and those are available on the OPWDD website. The provider responsibilities are identified on page 13 of the ADM, so you can go back and refamiliarize yourself with what these expectations are, but we are going to go through them briefly here. There's a whole variety of activities that can be documented to support your administrative fee. If you're audited, you'll need to be able to demonstrate documentation of some of these activities in order to retain the fee each month. We specifically did not indicate what form and format the documentation needed to be in because our providers have invested heavily in IT structures to support primarily waiver billing. So the provider can use whatever format works in their system to document these activities, but they do need to be documented and they need to be made available under audit. You would typically want similar items to the waiver services to be part of the documentation, what service is being provided, who it's being provided to, the date of the service provision, the person providing it, and what is being provided, a description. We've seen a lot of documentation in different formats coming in when we ask questions, if someone appears to need to be terminated from their housing subsidy, or if there's a change in their situation. So we know a lot of providers already have this built in. So we did leave that open for providers to develop their own system, but you would want to have sufficient supporting documentation for your activities. So we're just going to go through some of the activities that would be covered under this requirement. Obviously, helping people to apply for the housing subsidy program is a documentable activity. The annual collection of documentation to support the housing subsidy could also fall under that category. If you have a contract with OPWDD for a housing subsidy program, any required reports that need to be submitted to OPWDD under a contract would fall under this category and be acceptable as well. Updating a person's housing subsidy budget, if you're the provider, the housing subsidy provider, or the support broker supporting someone who is self-directing. Other things that are covered is reviewing the housing subsidy tab, the self-directed budget. We ask that there be documentation that this is reviewed as part of the housing subsidy program, so that would be something as well. we always ask that providers work with care managers to make sure that people's services are appropriate and, you know, they can maintain their services. So, you know, if the housing subsidy provider is working with the care manager in identifying appropriate housing, or if a person is seeking to move, those types of activities would be covered as well. Reviewing or arranging for the initial review. You know, if someone wants to go look at different apartments or housing units, you could work with the person to do that. Arranging for the annual review of the housing unit, that would be the QA expectations checklist. Filling out the QA expectations checklist, that would qualify you to retain your housing, your administrative fee. Additional areas, sometimes people have issues with their lease, or, you know, they're negotiating a new lease. That's something that we would expect a housing services provider to help someone with. If you're having issues with your landlord, that would be something that we would expect a housing services provider to work with as well. You know, if they're having problems with a roommate or with a neighbor, or, you know, something along those lines, anything that would jeopardize someone's stability in their housing, those are things we expect the housing services provider to support a person with. And if you should be documenting your activities in those areas, and that would be sufficient to retain your administrative component as well. Other activities identified, you know, if you're doing something and you think it might qualify, reach out to the regional office, and the folks there can take a look at that as well. Monitoring tenancy for situations where a person may be out of their housing for more than 30 days. If a person is like admitted to rehab for some length of time, or they're expected to be in extended hospital stay, we would expect you to notify the regional office that that's the person's situation, and we're asking for monthly updates on folks in those situations to make sure that their housing situation is not changing. For example, you know, someone might be in rehab, and then after a couple months it may be determined that they really need to be admitted to a skilled nursing facility or into a more restrictive setting, like, you know, they may need supports in an ICF or something along those lines, and, you know, that situation could change for the person. So we would need monthly updates when folks are in those types of situations. So that is an expectation of what we would be looking for from a provider as well, and documentation of those activities, outreach to the person, outreach to their care manager, outreach to the, you know, to the rehab center, to the hospital, to see what their situation is. You know, that would need to be documented, but that would also support your administrative component. Okay, just a quick summary. The administrative fee will only be paid if relevant administrative activities are completed and documented. It must be relevant administrative activity for the specific person. You know, we wouldn't want to see, for example, if the person is looking for if the provider was looking for a housing unit for a person who hadn't asked to be looking for a housing unit, you know, for example, if they're happy in the apartment where they are, and the person at the housing subsidy provider agency thinks, well, I think this might be a good match for them over there, then that's not, you know, documenting, collecting information about this other housing location over here is not necessarily appropriate if the person hasn't identified that they're looking for somewhere else to live. So, you know, always be sure that it's tied to what the person is looking for and what they need to support their housing at the time, and to ensure that they have stable and safe housing. Okay, so now I am going to turn the presentation over to Chad Colarusso to discuss the impact on the self-direction program.
Thank you, Tricia. So I'm going to share some information about the increased personal resource account levels in the new self-direction budget template, as well as the housing subsidies within that document. One of the major changes that will impact everybody shifting onto the new template is that there is a cost of living increase impacting PRAs. That's 5.4%. So regardless of people having housing subsidy, everybody will be getting that cost of living increase when they have budget amendments that switch over onto those new templates. As has always been the case, these changes are not automatic. Rather, they will be implemented with approved budget amendments, whether they be cost neutral or full budget amendments. The other major change on the self-direction budget template is incorporation of the housing subsidy updates that have already been discussed here. Those include increased payment levels, as well as the implementation of the fiscal intermediary administration component for housing. Now, as of today, with that template that's been released, the expectation is that all incoming budgets are on that new template. Next slide, please. Okay, so to dive a little bit more into the housing subsidy increase, there's two components. There's an increase in the payment levels as well as the implementation. Previous slide, please. Thank you. Implementation of the fiscal intermediary administration. And what's unique to this budget template involves those two, and we've already received some insightful feedback, people saying, oh, there's something with the calculation on this. But that is actually a new component of these budgets where those two new aspects, the increased payment levels for housing and the admin for housing, so again, this only applies to people who have housing in their budgets, they are held harmless to PRA. So what that means is people who have housing and are getting these increases with the changeover to the template will actually have that backed out of their total services amount, so it does not impact their PRA. And we're going to talk about that and demonstrate how it works in a little bit on the next slide. Another important point is that the new PRA levels with the cost of living increase are to accommodate any upcoming rates fees already in the budget, as well as anything that's upcoming. So where some rates and fee changes have not yet been released, when they are, there's not going to be another cost of living adjustment that is going to be incorporated here already. Also, it's important to note that any amendments to shift onto the new budget template with the idea of accessing the new PRA levels need to have actual changes. So OPWD is not going to approve amendments where nothing in the budget has actually changed, but rather there are only changes to the PRA. So there needs to be actual changes in the budget amount. Next slide, please. So this slide shows what the new budget summary page looks like, and it breaks out where the where that math is that backs out the admin and the increased subsidy levels from the total services. So most of this looks as it always has, and in this example, we only have state-funded services. So this is an example with somebody who had a $22,440 annual housing subsidy, and that is the new subsidy with the increased payment standards and the admin included. To back out the increase as well as the administration levels, there's a new line on the budget summary called the 2022 Housing Subsidy Payment Standards and Admin Fee Adjustments. So that adjustment line is really critical, and that's what's happening here that makes the numbers a little bit different from how they how they used to look. So essentially what's happening is the budget will calculate the actual amount that's going to be paid out at $22,440, but also recognize that $6,372 of that are factored in as part of the FI fee for housing administration, as well as the increase in subsidy. And in this example, it's a downstate example, so the fee was considered at $175 a month, so it's $2,100 for a year. And then there's an additional subsidy increase of $4,272. So in total, $6,372 are backed out. And you can see where that's reflected is actually in the total services line. So again, if you look back at the budget summary, there's $22,440 of actual services, but the total services, that's the amount being counted against personal resource accounts, is only $16,068. And to conclude, that's how it's going to work in the budget. We do understand that there is also some implications of this back out that'll touch on the cost neutral budget amendment process and expenditure reports. And we do have a plan to issue additional written guidance to describe exactly how that's going to be implemented and operationalized. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, we are going to pause for a few minutes to assess questions. So if anybody still has questions they haven't posed, please do enter those into the Q&A. And we're going to take a quick break and review some of those and look to address the questions we can. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. We are still making our way through some of the questions. Just wanted to answer a few that came up multiple times. There is one about how to get the information that was presented today. So we have actually already outreached our communications department to make sure that the recording to this training, similar to all of our other recorded trainings, is posted to the website as soon as possible. It will not be automatically emailed to folks. You will have to go to the website to see this recorded training. Another question that came up was, so an additional version of the template is being released, or the one 2 weeks ago is the one to use? So just to be clear, there are two sets of templates. There are the self-direction templates that have remained unchanged. You can continue to use those that were sent to you 2 weeks ago. For the housing subsidy template, we did just have those issued today with the instructions. So we did receive some feedback that the original housing subsidy template was a bit confusing with some reference to self-direction, and it was not intended to be a self-direction template. So those points of clarity have been made in the revised version. We're going to just take another minute to keep going through some of these questions.
Good afternoon. One of the questions that keeps coming up is also regarding what needs to be done, how frequently the administrative activities need to be done. You'll need to document one administrative activity per month. to retain the administrative fee. So that's not just, once a year and then it covers you for the entire year. You need to document an activity each month to retain the housing administrative component. So please, consider that when you're making plans to support folks. As a reminder, billing is not an acceptable activity to justify the administrative component. So there are other activities. There's a pretty long list with a lot of variation. We are looking for providers to support folks in their housing, who are receiving a housing subsidy in their housing arrangement. So you could reach out to them and make sure that the person is doing okay, see if they're having any issues, things along those lines. So it's a pretty broad group of activities, and they are identified in the ADM, and you will need to do at least one activity a month to support your administrative fee.
There's another question asking when will these changes take place? So in the memo that we had issued a couple of weeks ago, the effective date was today to make sure that we were able to have this training, to be able to have the educational information shared today to formally make these changes effective. So these are all effective today and moving forward. Thanks everybody for bearing with us while we scroll through the many questions that we have received so far. I do just want to let everybody know that if there are any questions that we have not been able to get to today, that we would ask for you to please ensure that you submit it to the housing mailbox or the self-direction mailbox if it is specific to self-direction. What we would like to try to do is pull together an additional helpful resource as a result of all of these questions to create some type of an FAQ document And like we mentioned previously, really making sure that we have a memo to address some of these very specific self-direction nuances. So we are seeing a lot of specific questions about documentation. So I think what we're going to need to do is just take that back and understand how we can further expand what has already been included in the ADM as the required responsibilities associated with the admin fee. So I think I'm seeing a question that is coming from a broker asking if attachment C should be sent directly to the RO, or will the fiscal intermediary send it with the housing packet? So it's not the broker who is the responsible party for submitting this directly to the RO. It is the fiscal intermediary. There's a question about certificate of occupancy documents being required. Somebody notes that it's not in the QA checklist. However, the FI is asking for proof. That is actually included in the QA checklist. So if there are additional questions about that, please reach out to our housing mailbox or to your regional office.
It's one of the top 3 items on the QA checklist, that there's a certificate of occupancy for the housing unit. So without that, the QA checklist would fail. But if you have a specific situation, you can reach out to the regional office or to the Housing Initiative's mailbox. There is a question also showing for those who do not qualify for a subsidy and have a letter from the HA, I assume that's the Housing Authority. Please send that question to the Housing Initiative's mailbox with the specific information that you're looking at. I'm not sure what it means if the person doesn't qualify for a subsidy. We need more information around that, and in a specific case, you should reach out to the Housing Initiatives or the regional office staff for assistance on that particular item.
There were several questions asking if the housing administrative fee for FIs is in addition to the standard Medicaid FI administrative fee for FIs, and the answer is yes. That's a separate and additional fee for when the housing administrative activities in a month, as Tricia described, are implemented, and that is in addition to the fee that the FIs receive as described in ADM 2019-07 for administering fiscal intermediary services and issuing expenditure reports as required by that.
Somebody asked if we did not receive the revised version of the housing subsidy template, how do we find or request it? Please reach out to your respective regional office. They will be able to share that with you. And if you have any additional questions, we've got our central office mailboxes on the screen for you. So somebody wanted clarification again that the self-direction template that was sent out a couple of weeks ago has been unchanged. That is correct. The self-direction budget has been unchanged since it was revised to include the new payment standards and the COLA. The only changes have been made to the housing subsidy template itself.
There's a question about whether the increase in the COLA is also increasing the caps for services within the self-direction budget, including individual directed goods and services and other than personal services. And the answer to that is no at this time. Those service subcaps are remaining the same.
Hi, there's been some questions about amending the ISS contract to accommodate the increase due to the administrative fees, and I think the contracts would have to go through the regular amendment process initiated with the DDRO. And then, it would be the expectation that all budgets funded in the contract are reviewed and updated prior to initiating a contract amendment.
There's also a question on whether the billing form for the FI is changing. Yes, that's anticipated that will change, but that won't be effective until 1/1/23, and additional guidance will come out on that as well.
There's a question, if somebody is self-directing and accessing a housing subsidy, are they using the self-directed template or the housing template? You would be using the self-direction template.
We received a question regarding whether a updated utility bill would need to be submitted with the new template. The expectation is that you provide the most updated information that you can regarding a person's budget and what information they have available. So we would expect to see newer utility bills. I think you may also see, under the current state of national affairs, that many people's utility bills are increasing as well. So that is something that you would want to see if there was a change, and submit more recent information if you're submitting an updated budget for a change in a person's housing subsidy.
There have been a couple of questions of people asking in general for a more robust training on the housing portion of the self-direction budget in general. There is a very complete training in the statewide learning management system that covers the entire self-direction budget, including the housing portion, cell by cell. It's dated back to the fall of 2021. Highly recommend people go back and check that first, as a very good resource that details the housing section of the budget as well as the entire budget. You can reach out to the self-direction mailbox or the broker mailbox if you're having trouble locating that training on the statewide learning management system.
Hi, there's a question regarding the attachment D. The comment is some regions are not using the Excel template for traditional housing, or using an attachment D to the ADM. The budget is the Excel template that we have distributed that will need to be used. The attachment D are the instructions to the housing subsidy budget template. So it describes what goes into each of the line items on the budget. We are in the process of uploading updated instructions that correspond to the various templates that have been released in the last couple of weeks that go into effect today. So the updated instructions, attachment D, should be being posted to the website in the next couple of business days. But what needs to be submitted historically is not the attachment D itself, but the housing subsidy budget template, and the attachment D is the actual instruction for it. So if you have specific questions on what is included or not included, the attachment D is a very good place to start, to look for specific recommendations on what is included or how to do the calculations. So please be aware of that. It is an attachment to the ADM, so you can access that through the link to the 2022-03 ADM that's out on the OPWDD website. If you do an internet search of OPWDD Housing Subsidy ADM, it should be one of the first items that comes up. Okay, we are reaching 4 o'clock, so we would like to just wrap up. Thank you all for participating today. We've answered a number of questions in the chat box. I recognize that we have not answered every question that has come in. If we haven't responded to your question, if you could send it to the appropriate email address, either Housing Initiatives or Self-Direction Redesign, based on what is the most appropriate venue based on your question, please go ahead and do that so that we have them collected and can review them, in totality. As mentioned earlier, we will be putting together, some kind of FAQ document around this particular change, and that information will be made available as soon as we're able to put it together in the coming weeks. So again, we do want to thank everyone for participating today, and any additional questions that haven't been answered can be sent to the appropriate mailbox, and we will follow up as soon as we are able to. Some of them, again, may just be part of the larger FAQ if we receive a lot of similar questions. If you have questions regarding a specific situation, please reach out to the email boxes noted or to your respective regional office staff for assistance on questions about specific cases. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend, and we appreciate everyone's participation today.